online. I think I have 30, almost 30 people online, so this is good. And we will also record this and we will post it on the Turlock Sub-Basin website, so people can watch it who are either not online or couldn't be at the meeting. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. I don't believe we have a quorum of the committee here today, but see Dennis out there. Dennis is a TAC member, board member. I'm sorry if I don't see others, but I think that might be all from the TAC that we have in the room today, but I know we have some others online. But with that, I will call the meeting to order and call for public comment. Are there any public comments at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. Mike, can you scroll down so we can see the next item? All right, well, easy enough. So we are going to start the meeting with Joel. I'm assuming starting with you.
Mike's gonna do an introduction.
Okay.
Joel.
I'm going to turn it over to Mike Tietza, who is the general manager of our GSA. And so he is handling all issues within the GSA, and he's going to launch us off today.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out to join us. Just to be clear, this is a TAC meeting. We don't have a quorum, but in any case, this is an informational meeting only, so no decisions will be made by the quorum and no actions will be taken. But we're having this meeting to inform you regarding our approach to using evapotranspiration to measure groundwater use and answer your questions. And take your comments and, take those forward with both the TAC and with the board. So I'm just going to have a few introductory remarks. I'm going to go through them quickly, but if you have specific questions or you want more information, then please go ahead and speak up. We've got until 11 o'clock if we want to take that long. And so, we've got plenty of time for questions and interaction, and we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. I also want to acknowledge real briefly that we do have, I think we have a quorum of board members and alternates present. But again, this is only an informational meeting and the board will not be taking any actions or making any decisions today. So I'll take about 15 minutes well, I've already spent a few minutes, so I'll take a few minutes for introduction. And then we'll turn it over to Joel Kimmelschuh from Land IQ, who's joining us to present information regarding their practice throughout the valley in using evapotranspiration from remote sensing. And then we'll talk a little bit about rules and regulation development. Because in order to use ET for our platform and to measure groundwater extraction, we need to figure out exactly how we're going to do it and to answer some questions. So I'll give more details on that in a minute. And then we've got 60 minutes for discussion. We don't need to take that long. We do have coffee and muffins back in the corner for you, and the bathrooms are down the hallway in the back there. So first, why are we here? The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in late 2014, and it applies to any groundwater basin in California, but is required to be implemented in what are called medium and high priority basins. We're in a high priority basin here. And what's required is that we implement monitoring projects and management actions to achieve sustainability in 20 years. And our aim is to do that with local control, because if we don't do it, then the state will tell us how to do it. And the premise of SGMA is that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, is that these things are best handled under local control. So our GSA was, GSAs were required to be formed by June 2017, and over 200 GSAs were formed throughout the state to implement SGMA. We were then tasked with developing a groundwater sustainability plan for the critically overdrafted basins. That was due in 2022 for us, in 2020. For us, it was due in 2022. We're not a critically overdrafted basin. And then we have to implement that sustainability plan with certain milestones and goals between now and 2042. Our sustainability plan was recently reviewed by the Department of Water Resources, and they found that it was incomplete, or they had a couple of things that they wanted us to work on. One of the primary things was the projects and management actions. They wanted us to make clearer how exactly we were going to manage ourselves to achieve our sustainability goals. So a little bit more on that later and our response to it. So the sustainable yield definition is the maximum quantity of water that can be withdrawn annually without causing what's called an undesirable result. And those are categorized into 6 different categories: declining groundwater levels to the point where it's undesirable or where it starts to hurt. Reduction in groundwater storage so that groundwater is not available as a viable water supply when you need it. Seawater intrusion, we have an X through. We don't have a problem with seawater intrusion here. Groundwater quality degradation is important, but less important for us as a groundwater sustainability agency. We're mostly focused on declining groundwater levels and reduction in storage, and on surface water depletions because our basin is connected to the Tuolumne and Merced rivers. And then we don't have an issue currently with land subsidence, but we have started to detect some subsidence around between the Belico and Delhi area, so we're keeping a very close watch on that. So who we are, we are one of 2 groundwater sustainability agencies in the Turlock subbasin. We're in the eastern part and reliant almost entirely on groundwater. In blue, you see East Side Water District, which Sarah is the general manager. In orange, you see Stanislaus County white areas or non-district areas. In yellow, you see Merced County non-district areas. The green is Merced Irrigation District, North Side Canal Service Area, and the reddish brown is Belico Cortez Water District. We have very limited surface water resources. We do have some, and we're reliant mostly on groundwater, and that over the long term has caused an imbalance that we're trying to correct over the next 20 years. So how do we do that? We do it with projects and management actions. And projects are things that you build physically to either provide more water or provide recharge. So providing water, we would, if we provide surface water, we call that in lieu recharge. And so in place of groundwater, we would be using surface water, and that's the best recharge because it's the groundwater that you don't use. We're also looking at direct recharge projects like through perk ponds and other similar methods to get more surface water into the ground and replenish our groundwater supplies. But we have limited water availability, surface water availability currently to make that happen. We're actively working to procure as much surface water as we can. Management actions are programs and policies that reduce groundwater demand. So one of our management actions is to measure ourselves so that we know what we're doing, and that also goes into operations. So what we're doing to address DWR's comments on our groundwater sustainability plan is we're putting together an overdraft reduction framework that has a groundwater pumping allocation program with it. And we measure that using the evapotranspiration or ET. So we'll implement projects, but we'll have to prioritize demand reduction because we have limited surface water availability. And we'll have to backstop with GSA intervention or pumping limitations as needed. That's not something that we want to do. It's something that we don't think that we necessarily have to do. But if things aren't working with voluntary programs and with a fee program, demand management program. Those are all voluntary programs unless the GSA steps in and says you must reduce pumping. And so we don't want to get to that point. Our actions are targeted to begin in 2024. In the area, I mentioned there's an area where we're starting to see some subsidence. And then we have some areas where we have interim milestones. So those are groundwater level targets set for 2027, and we're already below them. And so there's a few areas that we feel like we need to pay more attention to than others, and we can provide more detail regarding those for those that are interested. And then our program is intended to be implementation ready by 2025. And so what we're doing is, well, let me maybe use another slide for that. So we have a two-pronged strategy. And the first is demand reduction, or really net demand reduction, because it does include recharge projects. The more recharge we can garner, the less we have to decrease demand. And so we're trying to leverage that as much as possible. And then we have incentivized demand reduction. That's things like us paying you not to pump for a particular acreage for a particular amount of time. And for that, we also have a what's called a multi-benefit land repurposing program, or MLRP program, that we're kicking off. You'll hear a lot about that. That's intended to, if we're going to have to do something painful, let's do it in a way that gives us the maximum benefit possible, right? So let's try to integrate it with working lands. Let's try to get flood control benefits out of the deal, water quality benefits out of the deal, more recharge out of the deal. So things like on-farm retention basins, orchard swale rewilding, things of that nature that you might be able to get some other benefit for. And we would provide incentive payments to make that happen. We currently have an $8.89 million grant from the Department of Conservation to start that program. And then the backstop, as I mentioned, is mandatory demand reduction. The way we implement that and manage its implementation is we have a groundwater use management program with where we have tiered extraction fees and pumping limits. So we're setting up what would be like a sustainable yield pumping, and what's our baseline? What are we currently doing? And then we have tiers in between that where we set targets to decrease pumping incrementally until we get to that sustainable yield pump. And along the way, we'll learn more about exactly what that sustainable yield is, because right now we only have an estimate. And then in order to manage that, we're developing a groundwater accounting platform. Savannah Wade, she is with ESA that's working for us to develop that platform, and it's using a platform that's been used elsewhere in the area. And that will be used to tell growers how much they're pumping and to assess extraction fees, and to help to manage things like credits, carryover, trading, and so forth, to give you more flexibility in implementing demand reduction. It's all informed by monitoring. DWR has made clear to us that modeling and predictions are great, but if you see something different in your monitoring, they're going to believe the monitoring, and rightfully so. So we want to pay close attention to that. We're particularly interested, of course, in groundwater levels, also in subsidence, in reported dry wells, and how we're progressing with our implementation. And then we have an adaptive management program that periodically we evaluate, and if we hit a certain trigger for something that looks like it requires more action, then we progress, we escalate depending on what that trigger is. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail here. I mentioned there's a few concurrent things that are happening. We have a groundwater use management framework. We're developing policies, rules, and regulations. We're developing our internet groundwater accounting platform. We are developing a Proposition 218 groundwater use fee program. That's a per acre foot charge, again in tiers, similar to like your electric bill. And then we're developing policies that if we needed to intervene, how would we do that? What would our policies be? And there's various different activities, and they're all focused on being implementation ready by early 2025. We're also developing our MLRP, or multi-benefit land repurposing program. We're working with resource conservation districts, with West Turlock Subbasin, with various other agencies to develop that program and get a plan approved by the Department of Conservation by early 2025 so that we can start releasing incentive payments for that repurposing strategy. This land retirement program, this doesn't look for multiple benefits. This just looks for opportunities for folks who want to retire pumping, want to retire land. I mean, we'll have certain minimum expectations for what that would look like, but the idea is that we would pay folks to do that either on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis. And then recharge project program we're also implementing, and that'll continue to develop over the next over the next 20 years. The outcome is that our current average pumping is right around 200, groundwater pumping is right around 250,000 acre feet per year. We think we need to be a little bit above 150,000 in the long term. So we need to decrease by nearly 100,000. That is our best estimate at this point. We know that's going to change as we learn more about how the basin responds to changes in pumping. But you can see by implementing these management actions and projects over time, here's 2023, 2024, 2042 is way over here on the right. And our goal is to decrease that net demand over time until we're at that sustainable yield or below.
I got a question. How did you come up with the 257?
So the way that we came up with that is through groundwater model. And so, your model is only as good as the information that you put into it. And so basically, they took a model from the Department of Water Resources and they customized it for this area and calibrated it to actual groundwater levels. It's a pretty rough tool. And ultimately, what we did was we set our targets, what are called our minimum thresholds, at 2015 groundwater levels. So that's what we're aiming for, and that's how we measure ourselves and how DWR judges us. So the model is only like a high-level planning tool to get us started in the right direction. And we'll be continuing to use it. We'll be continuing to update it. But it's been said before, models are great tools, and some are useful. They're all wrong. So yeah.
So in 2015, if I remember, that was a heavy rain year.
2015 was right at the tail end of our drought, so it was considered by many folks to be sort of the low end of where groundwater levels were. The other thing is that under SGMA, that's a magic number. We're not responsible for anything for correcting anything before 2015. We are responsible for making sure that things don't get worse than they were in 2015.
So we know now that they are back there or worse, or?
So in some of our in a number of our wells, the groundwater level trend was declining. So in an area where you only depend on groundwater, your groundwater levels don't respond as much to wetter weather. They do respond some because you'll have less pumping because you've got more early season carryover moisture, but not as much as in areas where you have surface water available. So we've had these long-term declining groundwater levels, and that's where we were projecting that our interim milestones were actually going to, in 2027, we're actually going to be below the 2015 groundwater levels. And in many cases, that's already already true. And what DWR wants us to do is to turn that around so that they increase back above 2015 levels, so that we have some freeboard between where we manage the basin without going down below those 2015 levels.
So when they do this testing, they actually dip wells, go down and
Yes.
test the water levels? Okay, so like during the winter, my well will go, let's say 162. Not been running. I'm now 12 pounds higher, I've been running. So my standing water level increases.
Yeah, and that, you know, because folks pump during the irrigation season during the summer, so you will see this seasonal fluctuation. It's not as strong where we are as it is, say, in West Turlock Subbasin, where they have surface water that's also available, and where they have below the Corcoran clay, there's a confined aquifer that's more pressure sensitive. But you know, the monitoring is a key consideration, and we have an ongoing monitoring program. We're installing some new wells under a program where DWR will pay to get some new wells installed. We're working on that right now. Any other questions?
Yeah, at what point are we gonna have discussion?
We're gonna have discussion after all three presentations. So we
Yeah.
have an hour at the end.
Well, we're having some now, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, no, this is, I think, good clarification, but Michael probably move you along. If you think hold for discussion at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking for questions, you know, specifically related to the introduction of what our current situation is. So an ET is a very important tool for us to be able to measure ourselves, because what we can't measure, we can't manage. And so it's a key tool that we want folks to be knowledgeable about and comfortable with. And so with that said, I think I'll turn it over to the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. Does everybody understand what ET means?
I'm gonna tell you.
He's gonna cover it.
I'm gonna tell you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
It's evapotranspiration, by the way.
All right, beautiful. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Kimmelshoe, with a company called Land IQ. I hail from Sacramento. Prior to that, I hail from Butte County and come from a family farm. And we grow walnuts, almonds, and some row crops. So I always start off that way when I talk to growers, because I spent 13 summers irrigating row crops and trees and all that, so I understand where you're coming from. And I'm the fifth of 5 kids, so they kicked me off the farm and said, go get an education and get a job. So I did that. But I still have an interest in that family operation, but up in the Vina Subbasin in Butte County. So I'm gonna encourage dialogue as I go along. Please interrupt me at any point in time, any way you want, and just don't throw things at me. And then I'm happy to answer the questions as we go along, because I think that's a little more fluid, and we can address the topic at that point in time. I talked about Land IQ. We're a firm of about 40 people, primarily what I call land-based scientists and spatial scientists, and we developed our company in that fashion purposefully. So I'm an ag scientist, and we have a lot of those types of folks, and then we have that deal and understand agronomic systems and some environmental systems as well, but primarily agricultural systems. The other kind of main technical discipline in our company are what I call spatial scientists, and they're people that look at things from the sky. So they're called remote sensing folks, or GIS folks, look at imagery and interpret imagery. You know, nowadays we have all these satellites flying around the earth, and they're capturing images more than many of us even know. But those images are very powerful, no different than a picture you take on your phone. You can zoom in, you can look at the data, which are the pixels of those images. So our ag-based scientists or our land-based scientists inform our spatial scientists what an almond orchard looks like, what whole split looks like, when does ET drop a little bit, when growers back off on irrigation, those types of agronomic components when they're interpreting the spatial science side of it, the image. Yes, sir.
Well, considering the valley is alluvial, many fields have many types of soils. So is this equipment / imagery capable of evaluating the 3 different types of soils, which will either absorb less water or emit more of evapotranspiration from the growth of the plant? How accurate can that be per field with, say, 3 types of soils?
There's a lot more than 3 types of soils in California to
I
start.
understand that, I'm talking about one field, on my field.
Oh, in your field, okay, you have 3 types of soil. What we measure is what water, and I'll talk about this in a second, so, but I'll introduce it a little bit here. What we measure is the water that is consumed. That's the water that flows through the roots, up through the plant, and out the leaves, and also evaporated from the soil surface. So the main variable, and soil type does influence how a grower manages their irrigation water. You may have a coarse textured soil, and your neighbor may have a fine textured soil. On that coarse textured soil, if you're gonna meet the demand of your crop, you may have to irrigate more frequently, less amounts. On the fine textured soil, that grower may not have to do that. They may irrigate less frequently, but more amounts. So it's all about soil storage. What we work on is what the consumption is off the top. So it is a function of soil type, but more so a function of how the grower irrigates. Are you deficit irrigating? No. Are you over irrigating? Maybe not, so we're just saying, I'm going to talk about that. So just give me a second and I'll explain a little bit more. So these 2 technical disciplines inform one another. We did that on purpose. So we don't have a bunch of remote sensing folks saying, I think I know about agriculture. I'm kind of guess what it looks like on an image and how it operates. Or we don't have a bunch of land-based scientists trying to fake it as remote sensing scientists. So we put those 2 together on purpose. Growers tell me all the time, I just want to know how much water I use. And I put, just tell me how much water I use, and I underline the word use. There's 2 types of use. Applied water, which you apply to your surface of your ground, and consumed water, which is used by the crop or evaporated from the surfaces of which you apply. They are not the same number. So if you apply 100 acre-feet of water, nothing is 100% efficient, right? Nothing is. So if you apply 100 acre-feet of water, let's say your crop uses 90 acre-feet of water. That means you're about 90% efficient in your application. So applied, consumed, 2 different numbers. What happens to the 10 acre-feet of water that's remaining? That amount of water stays in your system. It's stored in your soil profile for future use, or it passes the root zone and eventually recharges groundwater. So we measure the consumptive part, not the applied one. I will slide here in a second that talks about the difference between applied and consumed and how those are measured and such. Both are valuable information. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. Applied does not equal consumed, and when you add precipitation in, that I call that received water. Your orchard received the sum of 2 parts of water, precipitation and irrigation. That's the water that hit your orchard, and that's the water that's available for use, consumptive use. It better be greater than what you consume, because that is not 100% efficient. Rainfall is great, but it's highly inefficient irrigation, right? It happens at the wrong time of year, and it happens all at once, but it is a portion of what your crop consumes. Okay, this is just a little flow chart that I put together, again, along those themes of water use. Then water use at the top. The next 2 boxes are applied water and consumed water. I just talked about those. How do you measure applied water? You measure that through meters. What you apply to the surface of your field. Consumed water can be measured in a number of different ways. I'm going to talk about how we do land use mapping in a second, but let's say, you have an orchard, it's an almond orchard. You can measure that. You can have in a GSA, you can say, we're just gonna put a single number across every field, make it an average and treat it like that. That's the most coarse way you can do that. Then you can say, well, we have irrigated versus non-irrigated. Remember, non-irrigated receives water too, precipitation. Irrigated receives both precipitation and irrigation. You can do separations like that. And some places are doing this. It's pretty coarse, not necessarily equitable across fields, but it's there. Then you can say, okay, we know what crop type is there. Let's go ahead and put a crop coefficient against that, like a reference crop ET times a KC crop coefficient gets you crop ET. That's a little more refined. That means that every almond orchard has a number. Every walnut orchard has a number. They're the same number because you have a reference crop ET times a number, which is the crop coefficient to give you a crop ET. That's not truly equitable too, because some orchards consume more or less than others. Then the advent of remote sensing came along and they said, okay, now we can know what the difference is between two almond orchards planted on the same soil type, the same age, the same varieties, the same spacing, all those things. But the difference would be how one grower A manages their water versus grower B. So let's say grower A deficit irrigates, doesn't meet the demand of the crop or the orchard. That means that orchard is going to consume less. They missed meeting the demand of the orchard. Okay, so, and then within remote sensing, you can have calibrated and non-calibrated. Non-calibrated is what we do. So we have these stations out here in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA, which measure the actual conditions on the ground that allow you to calculate actual ET. It's no different than you calibrating your spray rig. So you don't want to put on too much chemical. You don't want to put on too little chemical, right? So what do you measure? What do you measure? How do you calibrate your spray rig? You care about PSI, you care about ground speed, you care about nozzle size, you care about those types of things. So you're putting on the right amount of chemical. Here, in these stations, we measure relative humidity, temperature, precipitation, wind speed, net radiation, those things that allow us to calibrate our model. So we say what's happening on the ground with these stations, and we inform the remotely sensed folks that say that's the number. And when it looks like that over here, when we measure it over there, that should be a similar ET. So we have these stations around in order for that purpose. So we're on the far right-hand side. We've purposefully gone there. It takes more time. It's harder to have these stations out in the field, but the end result is a more accurate estimate of your consumption of water by block. And the important part is it's equitable between growers that are choosing different ways to manage their water. This is your area. So I'm going to first talk about, I think you can see that, yeah, that blue line that looks better up there than down here. Usually it's the opposite. The blue line that's around this is the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. You'll note this is crop type on this map. And you'll notice there's one color that dominates the crop type in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. That's almonds. About 80 to 85% of your area is almonds. So we work a lot in almonds. We work for the Almond Board of California. We work in South Valley. I'll show you in a minute. Very familiar with almond systems, including consumption. So why do I'm starting with land use mapping, and I'm going to come back to ET in a minute, but I want to start with land use mapping because I'll tell you the punchline right now. We integrate in crop type. So there's a range of ET that an almond orchard should be experiencing, which is different than a range of ET that a vineyard might be experiencing, which is different than a range of ET that a 110-day bean crop might be experiencing. So we integrate in the crop type into it, what we do. I won't go into this very far, for a lot, but just I'll get to the kind of punchline. We've been doing this for a long time. It's very important to know what's going on the surface of the ground so that you can accurately estimate things like consumption, yield estimations, planting densities, relationships to soil types in different areas of different crops, when they're planted, what's their peak date of vigor, when are they harvested, is you can align those dates with environmental conditions. So my brother runs our family farm, grows beans. He hates it when he plants his beans and it turns off hot right at bloom, right? It crushes your yields. So, but it's also, if it's hot and the timing of when the evapotranspiration of beans is taking place, you're gonna have more consumption during that period of time. So it matters when things are planted and when things are happening. So that's one reason why we do crop mapping. Yeah. So we started doing this work for land use in about 2010, 2011, and the Almond Board of California, the board members of the Almond Board of California came to us and they said, hey, we think we're pretty good growers, but we can't even achieve the average yields that the government, USDA, National Ag Statistics Service is telling us. I think I'm a good grower, but I can't achieve an average yield. What's an average yield? A yield is pounds per acre. What do they make? Money. The money is on the numerator, the pounds, right? So they weigh that, and they know that pretty accurately. So their idea was that the number that they were on the denominator dividing through was too small. Thus, artificially increasing, you divide through by a small number, it increases the overall number. So I can't even achieve an average yield. So we mapped Madera County in 2011, gave the map to the growers, they took it out and drove around. They said, oh, you did pretty well, but we think you got lucky. Do it again. So we did it in 2013 again. And they say, okay, fine, now map the whole state. And then they weren't satisfied with that. Well, they were satisfied with it, but then they always wanted more, which is fine. I understand that about growers. And then they said, now we want you to tell us the age of every orchard. These are all really smart ideas about understanding your crop more. Now, the Almond Board of California uses it for how much volume of crop do I have to market? What am I going to get? You know, you better know your footprint of that crop. You can also use it for estimating consumption of water. And the age component I'll talk to about in a minute. Young trees consume less water than old trees do. The canopy is smaller, right? Less leaves, going to consume less water. So if you know the age, you can integrate that into your estimates of consumption as well. Then walnuts got on board, prunes got on board, pistachios got on board. We did those 4 crops statewide. Then Sigma hit in 2014. And the state of California came to us and said, hey, here you're doing this crop mapping by law. We have to have crop everywhere in every field. So we started mapping every field in California, 2 acres and greater. So this one here, yeah, about 400. This is great dinner party conversation you could use. There's about 460,000 individual fields in California, greater blocks, not just fields, blocks. 2 acres and greater. We do a bunch of ground truthing. Remember, I talked about those stations that we use here for ground truthing calibration. For land use mapping, we calibrate according by driving and actually dropping points on iPads. We drive about 23,000 miles a year. Last year, we collected 93,000 data points. That allows us to create, if we drive by 4,000 almond orchards, and we tell our spatial scientists, our land-based scientists, tell our spatial scientists, those are 4,000 almond orchards. Figure out the digital fingerprint of an almond orchard. What do the pixels look like versus a walnut orchard versus bare ground versus other things? So long drawn out discussion to tell you these are data that are used in the process of determining ET and checking against what it should look like in the back end, because we know those ranges. So we have all these different kind of ways we get at validating the results. Okay, keep moving here. So this is Northern Region. We don't need to go through these very well, but it's just interesting. This is the DW. We do it for DWRs, and they have 4 regions in DWR, the Northern Region. We have all this. This is the crop legend on the upper right-hand corner of this slide. The mapping is on the left. An incomplete summary is on the right of the top 10 crops, but you get the idea. This is the North Central region. We're almost where you are. This is the distribution of crops there, same type of idea. Every individual, and these are not the boundaries, these are field boundaries. These are not parcel boundaries. These are the irrigated or cropped footprint of every field. It's not your parcel boundary. If you have you have an 80-acre block, you got a farm shop on the corner, and that takes up 2 acres. Our field boundary will show 78 acres. So it is the true cropped and irrigated footprint. So we're trying to get down into the most granular part as possible. So this is North Central. This is the granddaddy of them all where we sit today. And this is just, again, the DWR region, to get an idea of the distribution of crops and such. And this also includes the Salinas Valley, of which we visit 3 to 4 times a year because crops rotate 3 to 4 times a year there. And so we have to hit that. And so we only take a subset, we drive by the subset of the population again to create kind of a digital fingerprint of what spinach looks like, what head lettuce looks like, what other crops look like, blueberries and grapes and such. And then this is southern region, which is completely different. But we're all over down there too. And yeah, I spent a few nights in Blythe. It's okay.
No, it's not.
Anyway, these are some.
I spent a few nights, or a few years there, a couple nights as well. What does the state use this information for?
So, good question, and DWR funds it, and we deliver it to DWR, and it's publicly available. Anybody in the world can download it and use it. It's intended to be open information about crop mapping. They use it, DWR mostly uses it, depends on what agency you're talking about. DWR mostly uses it for estimating consumption of water, or using it as an overlay on a groundwater model. Galcimetol, for example, on a grid. So again, if you're not estimating or measuring ET with the way we do it, with remote sensing and kind of tense approach, how else are you going to do it? You better know what's growing there and make an estimate on almonds use this much, walnuts use this much, etc.
No, I comprehend what you're saying is the information that we can use, but what does a DWR do with that information?
They use it for their estimates of consumption of
But
water,
why do they need to know that?
because that's their job, to know how much water is being used and how
Well,
much water
why
is
don't
being
we
delivered,
fire
and how
them?
much water is being used. What's that?
Why don't we fire them? Because they don't need to know how much
Well, I'm not
water
in
to
the
use.
business of firing government employees, so you.
Pardon me?
So every 5 years, DWR is tasked by the state with developing a water plan, because we have to have a plan as a state for what we're gonna do with our water and how we're gonna manage it.
Perfect.
And this information is used in that plan.
Yeah,
Well, maybe you can tell us then what the plan is to increase the amount of surface water, because that is the only solution to our problem is more surface water. So what is the state doing for more surface water in their plan every 5 years?
So
We're getting information on this. We're not-
Yeah, but it's information.
Right, that'll come later. We'll let you talk later about stuff like that. We're just getting information right now.
yeah, that's a completely different topic. I'm not prepared to speak to.
Pardon?
I'm not prepared to speak to what the decision making of the state about surface water.
So let's come back to that question, because I have a few things to say about surface water,
Yeah.
but,
Well, go on. So anyway, so this is that, Southern California. These are some of the entities they work for. And this is the map of the state, so I won't dwell on that. But because you grow so many almonds here, I thought this was an interesting slide. I pulled it out of another presentation. We've been doing this mapping for a long time. Well, about a decade now, and a little bit more for almonds. Almond Board, California. Many people that aren't involved in agriculture think that agriculture is a static, non-changing thing. It changes a lot, and it changes rapidly, and especially where there's annual crops grown and the market, all sorts of things drive it. You already know this. But I thought this was kind of interesting, just to show this slide that we're seeing a reduction in almond acreage. Why are we seeing a reduction in almond acreage? Market conditions. There's Sigma is a big deal, and it's driving some change. So I only show this slide because it's important to know how the surface is changing, the landscape is changing, and that's a very important thing to keep track of. Okay.
Ask a little bit about the process of the ET. Because this day is not like that day. Are you monitoring that constantly? Do you take a reading every day of how much got consumed?
Yeah, it happens every 15 to 30 minutes. in our stations, and I'm almost gonna break into ET, so.
You know, okay, thank you.
Yeah, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage of, we're not just looking at ET, we're looking at how the land use is changing and using that as information and how we do our work, okay? Accuracies, I talked about those, part of what we do, ground truthing, we set aside data points, say, we never drove, pretend like you never drove by it. Model it, try to predict what it is, was it an almond orchard, yes. But, oh yes, by it, and so if we did drive by it, what did we predict versus what did we observe? 97. Right, when we get it wrong, we don't confuse almonds for carrots. We might confuse almonds for peaches, which have a very similar consumption. And then this one too, we take every permanent crop out there and then we look backwards in time from when that fingerprint of a permanent crop changed to a fingerprint of bare ground. Then we know what year it was planted. If you know what year it was planted, you can do some estimates on consumption moving forward. I'll show you some, and then we do some irrigation method work. Irrigation method matters with regards to some methods are more efficient in how they irrigate than others. I always ask, I tell people, I said, be careful about how efficient you ask agriculture to be. Because it used to be, we were recharging groundwater quite well. And then everybody said, to agriculture, you gotta be more efficient, you gotta be more efficient. So put in double line drip. Now, are we recharging groundwater well with that, as well as we were when we were impacted sprinkler or even border check flood? No. So I can tell you, be careful about how everything's like that. You go one extreme or the other, it's out of whack. So anyway, look at the irrigation method. Lots of proximity analysis you can do. I'm not gonna go there. Okay, now. All of that said, I'm gonna talk about ET now. That's what we came here to talk about. And I still encourage you to keep asking questions. I prefer a dialogue. So we started doing like we do field by field, block by block crop mapping. We started doing field by field ET. And we looked at other models that are out there. And we said, knowing that Sigma was coming, we said, we gotta be more accurate than those other models. How do you be more accurate? You measure and calibrate to what's going on the ground and calibrate every month. We do this every month. So the map on the right-hand side is the areas that we work with. We started in Semi-Tropic Irrigation District in central northern Kern County in 2014. And we cut our teeth there for a couple of years. And then the neighbors looked on North Kern, looked over the water storage district, looked over the fence, said, okay, we want to do that. And it's just kind of grown organically since then. And the green areas are where we work. It represents, about 35 GSA in the district, about 3.5 million acres, different crops. And we also on these stations on the lower center part of this slide, there's a figure of precipitation. So remember I talked about received water equals precipitation plus applied water. We better know what's hitting the ground from precipitation too. So on all of our stations, most all of our stations, we have precipitation gauges. And we use other publicly available precipitation measurement locations as long as we trust them. So it's just an attempt to create more accurate information on the water balance so you can make smarter decisions moving forward. And that map on the lower left is a precipitation map, and in that span of distance, and I'll show it to you a little bit later, from just southwest of Wasco to northeast of Visalia, the precipitation can change by 3 times. So if you're gonna, let's get busy and understand the water that's going on that field, because just because it rains, 8 inches in Tulare, that doesn't mean that it's 8 inches north of Visalia. It could be 12 or 13. So we're just trying to get things more accurate. Okay. I already talked about ET, but just in case, evapotranspiration is the sum of 2 things: evaporation and transpiration. Transpiration is the part that goes through the plant. Evaporation is things that evaporate before it goes before it goes through the plant. Ground truthing. I talked about a ground truthing for land use mapping. This is the type of ground truthing that we do for ET. And these are some images of those stations on the right-hand side. Why do we do it? We do it because it's defensible. We do it because we can actually conduct independent validation. We can calibrate to actual conditions. We measure those things. We have a whole crew of people. Their job is to make sure those stations are measuring and reading the parameters that we're measuring accurately. It allows us, when there's a lot of cloud cover, remotely sensed imagery, and there's a lot of cloud cover a long period of time, most satellites can't see through the clouds. And if you're only relying on that, you've got to interpolate between a point way over here and a point way over there. It could be months to weeks and months of time. When we have ground stations, we can at least lean back on the actual conditions to better refine those estimates. We're under the clouds, but we can see that, or can measure that. We put those stations in specific crops. When there's dominant crops in a certain area, we'll have you put stations more heavily in those crops. And then we work with the whole crew of advisors from UC Davis and other places. I term our approach a ground up approach. We start at the ground level and work up. Okay, we have about 85 stations in the South Valley. You see them on this map here. I talked about precipitation gauges on those stations, crop type, and it's used for a whole variety of purposes. And every GSA that we work for or irrigation district, we provide the data, then they use it how they want in the policy decision-making, fee structures, pumping allocations, consumption allocations, planning, whatever. But we focus on just delivering this information. This is just 12 months of an irrigation district in Kern County that we work in. In January, February, and November, December, things look about the same because not a lot of ETs going on because it's cold and there's no leaves on the trees, and things are pretty equal. But you can see when you integrate it in the crop mapping, when you have those individual field boundaries, like in May, June, July, and August, which actual blocks are consuming more water than others. So blue in this slide means there's greater consumption going on, and red is the least consumption. You see red blocks in June and July. Why is that? They're fallow. They're not consuming much water at all because they're not irrigated, but we still want to know how much water they are consuming. And there's a whole lag effect between when it last rained and it doesn't all evaporate in overnight. It can be a month or two, depending on when it rained and how much. So we want to know this. We're tracking everything. Crop type, that's deliverable one. So we have 4 deliverables that we provide to every GSA, including the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. That's deliverable 1. Deliverable 2 is crop mapping. So you get your crop map to the things that I already showed. And that's important information for reporting purposes, for 5-year GSP updates and such. Precipitation, I talked about that, and it's important to understand that more accurately. And then field by field permanent crop age, and we throw that in too because we do it and it's valuable for people to think about. And I'm going to take a little diversion here. Think about, especially when you're growing a lot of almonds, when will an orchard come out? 25 years, 27 years, something like that. We also started the same work up in the Vina Subbasin in Butte County, actually where I'm from. And they have a program up there that they're implementing, a demand reduction program called Extend Orchard Replacement, which means it incentivizes growers to perhaps leave their orchard out just an additional year. Think about that. It's kind of like a rotating fallowing program. And that, if you leave, and everybody gets in the mix, especially when you're in an almond heavy or tree crop heavy area, that extend orchard replacement. So you're incentivized to leave it out a year, you're not pumping that year. So it just rotates around the landscape. And that is a way to reduce pumping. And we're starting that, assessing quantifying what that effort will be. So if we know the consumption on a 25-year-old almond orchard, and we know the consumption on a fallow field, the difference is the savings if you leave that orchard out an additional year. So those are just another idea that we're using elsewhere. Okay, so those are the 4 deliverables. So let's just use these results. I just took quarterly snapshots of a few areas that we work. This is January, like I said in that other slide, everything's about the same. Not a lot of ET going on. There is some. ET happens all the time. So don't think that it doesn't. It does. It's just really small at certain points in time. April kicks in, things start to warm up, crops are planted, if it's an annual crop, trees are leafing out, things start to kick in, you'll see the gradient there on the color ramp scale. July, things are humming along like crazy, right? That's your peak ET month. That's when hottest and consumption is occurring the most. And then September, ironically, looks a lot like April. Because, you know, you went up that demand curve, peak, back down, September and April are pretty similar, then you're back down here in the winter months. So we just do this on a monthly basis. And you can see there's just a whole variety of consumption, depends on where you are, what you're growing, how you're irrigating, what irrigation management tactics are you using, etc. But the concept overall of remotely sensed ET is that we know the consumption of every single. And that is important because we want to treat people equitably. If you are consuming more, that's your choice. We also work with growers. So if when you're getting your results, call us and say, I want to understand this better, or I don't think it's right. Usually growers call us and they say, oh, wait a minute. You said I had 6 inches of ET and I only applied 5 inches of water. How can that be? You just blew out your 100%, nothing is 100% efficient. I said, and that was, say it's June and I applied only 5 inches. Say, did you irrigate on May 31st? Oh yeah, that's not June. So then that water is there to be consumed in June. And, you know, so there's this whole lag effect. You have to keep in mind the time frame that you're chopping things up into. And usually, and then on the shoulder months, it'll be precipitation. I only irrigated 2 inches. You said I had 3 consumed. Well, it rained 1.5. So you actually received 3.5 and I say you had 3. So we're never perfect. So we're always open to communication. Every field is different. These are just almond orchards in different areas, and they're all almond orchards on the map on the right. And you can see, depending upon age, depending on how a grower manages it. Yeah. This is just kind of I have like 2 or 3 more slides. This is just kind of an interesting summary slide, and these consumption ET. This is cumulative ET over a calendar year. We usually do everything on a water year, but this is, you get the same idea here. And over every month, so we just added it every month and added it to the cumulative curve. And this is for thousands of orchards in the South Valley of these different tree crops and only mature orchards. Yes, sir.
It sounded to me a minute ago like you said we're gonna get charged for rain.
I did not say you're gonna get charged for rain. That's
It
a
falls into the consumed.
It is, but we measure it. And so if it's the decision of your GSA, every GSA manages rain a little bit differently. It's a very good question. Every GSA manages rain a little bit differently. Some include it, some don't, some use averages, but we measure it. So we're going to give you a number that for your block that says that's how much rain hits your block. How your policy is determined is different. But we measure for that purpose. Go ahead.
I can speak to the policy, and Savannah's gonna talk to that a little bit later. We are subtracting out delivered surface water and effective precipitation. So the precipitation that's available for the plants to use, we're subtracting that out so that.
So you get back to just the groundwater.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we want to do is not have your field that's 15 miles away from the nearest rain gauge, relying on that when it's not right because it's a different area. We're peppering the landscape with these stations so that we get a tighter estimate of what actually hit your field. So you're credited, or however they do it, correctly.
I already have those.
Well, it's good.
And what about flow meters? How does that? You're estimating, but we have actual numbers.
So if you have an actual number, we're going to be working on a process where if you want that number to be considered instead of the ET, we're going to develop a process that'll enable you to do that. We basically, we started with ET because we have probably 2,000 some odd wells in our groundwater sustainability agency. Some of them are metered, others are not. If they're metered, some folks are willing to share the data, other folks are not. And so, ET was kind of a natural way for us to measure this area wide and for us to establish a baseline. I mean, the data from which ET is derived started being collected back in the 1980s. And we've established a baseline that actually goes from 2011 to 2020. That's our, we have a 10-year baseline period that we selected there that was historical. And you can't do that with metered data. So
Yeah.
that's why we're here with ET.
So I think
Last question then, regarding rainfall, when it rains in the winter and I'm not pumping at all, is that credit back to me?
It's funny because we were just talking about that. We're planning to treat it like a checking account. And so rainfall is a deposit, ET is a debit. And that checking account gets updated for every month of the year. So yes, you do get credit for the rain that falls during the off season.
You know, that's a great, you brought up a topic I want to touch on, and that's meters and ET. So just recently, the Kern or the Tulare Lake subbasin is a critically overdrafted groundwater basin, and they went on probationary status with the State Water Resources Control Board. And in that long drawn out process, the staff of the State Water Resources Control Board said, well, everybody's got to have a meter. You got to report your meter readings. And meters are important. And it's a very good data point to work off of for various reasons. And I applaud the GSA for giving the growers the option to choose either ET or meters. I think sometimes people think of meters like you have a meter in a residential home where every meter is the same. Every pipe diameter is the same. Every meter is installed the same way. It's in the same vault. It's read by the same people. It's maintained by the same people. They try to do this all the same. That's not the case in agriculture. You know this, right? You have a stretch of pipe. You're going to slap a meter in that stretch of pipe. How big is your pipe? How old's the meter? Is it an impeller meter? Is it a mag meter? You know, all these things are different. So meters are fine. They're good, and it's an important thing to lean on. And then what Mike brought up. Are you going to be representing the entire landscape with meters? Well, because what we're doing here is trying to manage the whole landscape, right? So let's say I got a well, I got it on diesel, it's the middle of 160 acres, I had it abandoned. Maybe I'm not as honest an individual as I should be. I might start that well up, pump groundwater.
Good for you.
This is a hypothetical situation. You know, that's gonna happen, let's be real, okay, that type of stuff is gonna happen. Now, that should not happen, and the penalty should be severe, but not everything's gonna be equal, at least with ET. I know the lowest consumption block out there, and I know every block out there. I know the highest consumption block out there, and if it's not even that, where you try to be accurate, but at least it's relative across the board. So then it's equitable, and everybody's accounted for. So, but we love to compare the meter readings because we darn well better be below a meter reading, which is the sum of received water. But we don't use that as a calibration method. We use it after the fact, look at results. So,
But a point here that he just made, if you are pumping, it's gonna affect your ET value and it's gonna show up like a sore thumb. So they're gonna go out and say, why are you so different? Oh, I see, you're using your diesel pump. But mark my words, ladies and gentlemen, the meter is the first step of taking control of your well, not the area's well, your well. If you're over pumping, the DDLBR is gonna come in and say, stop pumping. So who here is willing to give up their crop and push it over and
We get
start?
political again, let's leave that for later.
Well,
With that information.
I think
It's a pretty political topic. to
Oh,
talk
I
about
know,
here.
but we want information first and then I
Oh, it all
want to
plays
get into
together.
political too, cause I fall on you guys' side too.
It just all plays together.
Yeah.
So I think having meters and ET together are a great thing because I can have two growers that are identical orchards, 2 blocks identical, right? Same soil, everything. The demand is going to be very similar. Right? As long as you're irrigating to meet the demand, putting on enough water to meet that demand, they're going to be pretty similar. So I mean, you don't got a lot of trees out, holes and stuff like that. But this grower could be applying 10 or 15 or 20% more water than this grower. What we want to do is say, okay, look, you got the difference between your meter and your demand. It's this much for this grower and it's this much for this grower. Do we want to work with this grower to kind of reduce his pumping a little bit, still meet the demand of the crop so he doesn't affect his yield or anything? But we want to work with them to kind of maybe reduce something. So meters are good. Okay, I'll keep going. I got 5. Yeah. These are this figure here is just an example of a figure that is all includes precipitation ET. We can back out precipitation to get to applied water ET because we know the precipitation. There's some ways to do that. But anyway, people ask me, say, how come almonds are more than walnuts? Walnuts are this big old tree and they got big old leaves and it looks a lot like, looks like it would consume more water. It's greener and all this, right? Well, don't kid yourself that walnuts leaf out about a month after almonds do. So they have a month less of time to consume water. So you got to know the agronomics piece. That's my point. Pistachios, you know, I showed you that figure of almonds doing this, you know, dropping off in acreage. There's a similar figure for walnuts dropping off in acreage. Pistachios, like that. Why? One of the reasons is because they've done a great job marketing, but another reason is because they use about 75% of water that almonds and walnuts do. So there's some growers that are switching crops to a lower water use crop to keep the same footprint, try to keep their income coming on that same footprint without fallowing ground. There's that too. Okay. This is just a figure of cumulative ET, same thing, but starting in a water year. And you can see that big wide range on the right-hand side. Somebody's at the top of that range, in the top part of that gray bar, and someone is at the bottom of that range. Those are all mature almond orchards. And this is the concept of not everybody consumes the same amount of water. There's a big wide range and it depends on a lot of things, soil type, how you irrigate, weather such. This is when we do age. I talked about age. Now we can start to bin things by age. This is age on the bottom axis and ET on the vertical axis. Little trees consume less water until this is almonds, till it gets to a point, and then kind of your canopy gets as big as it's going to be, and it kind of plateaus throughout 7 years or so. This is a comparison of 30 almond orchards by age. 30 almond orchards by age. This is the sum of the received water, the blue bars, precipitation and irrigation. So that's how much water hit each of these 30 orchards. Each bar is an orchard. The green line is our ET. And I said, the second slide I showed you said you better be below the sum of your received water. So your ET better be less. So these are the things we do after the fact to kind of make sure we're in the ballpark where we should be, and work with growers. And these are meter readings on the dark blue bars, meters, and we make sure they're calibrated and such. So, and this is the same thing for pistachios. It gets to the point that the sum of the orange bars on both of these figures on the left and the right is 29.3 and 29.2. But the water received on one was 3 inches more, and the difference in consumption was 1/10 more. So this grower on the left-hand side, we might be able to bring him down a little bit if we know this information. And that's the intention for you to do it yourself.
Joel,
Yeah.
of all the perimeters you measure, obviously, we're talking about ET, but you touched on it a couple of times, the soil holding capacity of our parcels are all going to be different. That's something that a lot of growers, including myself, really don't have a handle on. Are you measuring anything like that? Is there any data that would tell a grower what the soil holding?
Well, we just tell you what is consumed, and that you're getting back to irrigation management.
Right.
And that soil type definitely.
It's an important equation, I think.
Yeah, important. It's very important. This will, how your soil type impacts management. Therefore, I can't tell you when and how much to irrigate your soil type. That's a grower decision.
Right.
I think I'm done.
Could you go back one slide?
Sure, that's one, wait.
No. Yeah, there you go. So I can't see real good, but the green line is what you're saying that they consumed?
Right,
All right, so just, I'm just out of curiosity, year 5 and year 7 or something
yeah.
on the left, where the consumption dipped, I mean, the precipitation and the applied water as well. I mean, why?
These are individual orchards. It's a grower decision how much they apply. And some of the ones that are right up at the top means the grower these are down in Kern County, so they're.
Oh, okay.
This is, it was 21 and 22 were dry. Now, we have these same figures for 23, and you might imagine the bars go much higher above because of the precipitation component. It increases the bar. Some growers will take advantage of precipitation and monitor their soil moisture. So they irrigate to take advantage of precipitation, even though it's pretty small down there. And then some of the big difference is I called some of these growers, I said, what are you doing? They said, well, I purposely applied some of them. I purposely apply the leaching fraction to keep the salts down. So they're applying more purposefully. So the difference of my green line is going to be lower. There's always a reason why. We just use this to kind of check those things. Okay, I think I'm done.
So, if that's Savannah, come up and you want to drive your own.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, you can scoot.
Yeah, okay. You're on the way.
I was hiding. Okay, let's see, we're still jump.
Can I just, in answer to your question, we are gonna be working, with growers as part of our repurposing strategy to look at, different irrigation scheduling tools for those that are interested and, you know, maybe want to know about some tools that are out there that some of you may not be aware of.
You familiar with the Ammon board's irrigation scheduling tool?
So I am out of my depth. So Ken Miller, knows of some tools that, you know, we'll be introducing that are recently developed. And he is familiar with the Allen Board's tools. But there's some recent tools out of UC Davis that look pretty promising. And, you know, it's free stuff and you know, there's good information available online. What we're not gonna do is send everybody to a re-education camp, right? So we're interested in making tools available that will be helpful. So I just wanted to make folks aware of that.
Yeah, that's helpful. I'm
I
gonna
have
try.
one comment before we jump ships here. In reference to 2 things in my lifetime that are the worst things that ever happened: conservation and recycling. It costs us billions or trillions of dollars. And Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, if we irrigate too tightly, you're gonna have buildup of salts and your production is gonna go to nowhere and your land's gonna be worth nothing. So that's a caution. Is that a factor taken in at all by the DWR?
There are absolutely ways to manage salinity, and I talked about them already, and that's in a purposeful applied leaching fraction. And so they've been doing that since the dawn of time. You know, you can think about the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, why that went away because of salinity buildup, but they could have managed it. So that's a grower decision. That's a monitoring of your soil salinity. That's understanding where you stand with your salinity levels and making a decision on how you're going to manage that.
Solution to pollution is dilution, right? So you gotta push water through it to get rid of it.
Sometimes, yeah. Hopefully you get frog strangler rainstorms that do it for you.
How much, of the city wells and stuff are, you know, that are basically in line with the groundwater basin and how they pump, they report it to
stay?
Yeah, it gets reported to DWR, and so that information is available. In ETS GSA, we don't have city municipal supply systems. There are a few small, what are called small community systems, like mobile home park type of systems. A bunch of domestic wells, and mostly, most of the groundwater demand in our area is ag wells. And currently, we estimate it using, ET and or land use information and crop coefficients. That's the best way that we have of estimating that demand. That's where that 250,000 acre foot per year on average.
So when the cities footprint expand, goes away, they were surface water or farmland, they develop in the homes. How do they monitor that at that point?
So each city is required, if you have more than, I forget what it is, I think like 4,000 connections, you're required to have an urban water management plan. And that gets reported out, every year that, they set certain targets for the city, and the targets have been getting tighter. So that's available on the DWR website for urban water management plans. And, any of this, if you have interest in talking further, I'll talk to you until you're tired of listening.
I would also add in the Turlock subbasin, many of the communities that are on the West Turlock side of the basin are members and they're participating in Sigma.
Yes.
So
So Turlock.
the west side of the basin is, yes. Somebody in the back has a
Yes.
question.
Now, if we got, land in the west Turlock subbasin and east, can we transfer water between those two basins?
So that's gonna be part of rules and regulations. Interbasin transfers are generally regulated by the counties. Inter-GSA transfers, we don't currently have a policy, and that's just something that we would need to look at to see that between the GSAs that we're meeting our policies. So that's something that we will be, it's a question that hasn't come up for us that we will eventually, yeah. So, generally speaking, on our side, our boundary was set up on TID's boundary, right? So, there's other agencies that have an interest in regulating moving of surface water around into or out of, you can only do that under some circumstances. And then, with respect to groundwater, we don't currently have a policy, it hasn't come up yet.
It seems to me that, and I was at a meeting here about a year ago where I said, the solution to this problem is bringing in more groundwater. And I was told, well, you're singing to the choir. Well, when the hell's the choir going to start singing is what my question is. Because look at the Merced River right now. It's pouring water all over the place. Fallen is doing the same thing. Where is it going? The ocean. We got rising sea levels. Quit sending water to the ocean. The sea levels go down. But all this baloney that's going on right now, that's what it is, baloney. It's about time that, people start listening to the goddamn government that's trying to take the water away and are treating the farm. It's about time they quit doing that and get rid of these dang politicians that promote this crap.
I don't disagree. I think that we are a local agency focused on groundwater, and we're focused on the narrower question of how are we going to comply with the groundwater regulation and cause our groundwater levels to come back up so that so that agriculture can sustainably use groundwater for the foreseeable future. That doesn't speak to this kind of policy solution regarding making surface water generally more available, but we are actively engaged with TID, with Merced Irrigation District, and through TID with SFPUC, who are the water rights holders, right? So that is probably the limit of what we can do. So I probably, you're probably not going to get much satisfaction from us with respect to this, the frustration with state policy.
No, all we're gonna get is a bill.
To do local stuff.
The local isn't solving the problem. It's a bigger problem. It's a statewide problem.
that's not an issue that we're gonna be able to, because we're not paying for a lobbyist to go to the state and change this. We are paying for local compliance with SIGMA, so the state doesn't put us into probation. So and I realize that's a completely unsatisfying answer, and it probably makes you angry, and you're not alone. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, could you give us a little more information on the subsidence between Rico and Delhi?
So, let me just answer that question quickly and then turn it over to Savannah. So, there's a technology called INSAR that, DWR has been using and others have been using to measure the ground surface remotely. And what came to our attention was that between about 2015 and the present, that the ground surface in the area between right around, where the rest stop is on Highway 99 southeast of Turlock, going into the area toward, I guess it'd be west of Belico, through the Cortez, actually pretty close to this area, that's dropped by between about an inch and maybe 4 inches, depending on where you are. So it's not enough to get excited about or write home about, but it's enough to note that, hey, this is really happening. We didn't think that it would happen here. And it has happened, and so we're paying close attention to it so that it doesn't happen more and get to the point where the canals and drain sewers, flood control doesn't function properly. Now, there have to be a lot more subsidence before that happens. But, with groundwater levels dropping, the clays tend to depressurize, and there's more clays in that area that's getting in toward where the Corcoran clay is present. And so, that's a hazard that right now it's just, it is firmly on our radar screen. It's not a problem yet, but we need to pay serious attention to it. And, frankly, that's the kind of thing that we're more focused on. Yeah. So,
Okay,
Savannah.
yeah, looking at time, we've got about a half hour left, so I'm gonna try to get through this in maybe a little less than 15 minutes, and then we'll still have time for discussion. So my name is Savannah Cheese, for ESA, which is Environmental Science Associates, helped out GSA's developing rules and regs and groundwater accounting systems, down in Tulare County, down in Kings County, and now up here. So I'm just gonna run through real quick. I have 2 jobs for ETS GSA. The first is really to support the facilitation of our rules and regs ad hoc committee. So we have a group of growers and ETS GSA staff who get together once a week to talk about rules and regulations and kind of get into the weeds on these things. And then we bring them back to the TAC, to the board as recommendations. And then my other job is to kind of help with the platform development side. So we had a procurement process that was a public process, and ESA's team was selected to use the groundwater accounting platform, which I'll introduce a little bit later. But I work really closely with our technology team to help them understand what the rules that we're making are and how they should show up in the software. So primarily facilitating this rules and regs ad hoc committee, and then I also support our software team in making sure that they're getting things right. So here's our process. I think it was two or 3 months ago now, we formed our ad hoc rules and regs committee. We have a topics list, which we'll go through. We provide materials in advance to our ad hoc committee. Then we get together and we have a discussion every week, thinking about the materials in the packet. We come up with recommendations based on consensus within that group. If we're stuck on something, we'll take it to the TAC, and then the TAC can have a discussion there. But once we have our recommendations, we report those out both to the TAC and to the board. So those updates are public and we can get into them every month in those meetings. I just wanted to put up here really quickly who's on this committee, just so you guys are aware. Me, Mike, and Sarah are closely involved. We've got a groundwater accounting platform team, and then we have 8 growers representing different districts and areas in the county. If you're interested in getting involved, please reach out to us. I think we could accommodate a few more stakeholders in this group. But but just want to make sure that everybody's aware that we're working with growers, on the rules and regs process. This is our meeting schedule. So like I was saying, we meet every single week. We have our ad hoc committee meetings, discussing rules and regs, and then we work really closely to develop the platform. I just want to put this on your calendars. I think that this has gone out, in the newsletter, but on June 25th, we're going to be having a public workshop for the groundwater accounting platform at the Turlock Community Library. So at this workshop, you'll be able to come. We have an activity sheet that you can actually get set up on the platform. And the platform is where you'll be able to see all of the land IQ data that Joel's been talking about. So that's where you'll be able to see the consumptive use data. This is our topics list for everything before that June launch. So we've kind of broken this up into phase 1 and phase 2. The first phase is focused on everything that we need to know in order to get ET data into your hands, starting in June. So that's looking at like, what is the base unit and time period that we're gonna do this accounting of consumed water over? Thinking about, how do we want to total ET at the parcel level, things around how your accounts are going to get created and what the operational flexibility you have is there. And then we get into some of the fun stuff around accounting for effective precipitation, which Joel talked about, which we had our discussion about yesterday. And then getting into surface water delivery, how do we want to get that information into the system? And then something that we've heard a lot from folks today is prioritizing this appeals policy with meter data. So it's the GSA's intention that if you have meter data, you can bring that to us and it can be used as in lieu of ET data. So that is an appeals policy that we're going to be actively working on and should have more information about hopefully before June, before the June launch, but if not at the June launch, pretty soon after that, we should have some answers for what we're thinking for appeals. This is outdated, but we just finished, we just finished our effective precipitation meeting yesterday. So we're in the process of looking at water account updates, and then we're moving through the schedule pretty quickly. So we'll be looking at surface water next time, updating accounts, and then we'll be getting into that appeals process with this group. Okay, so real quick, I just want to introduce the groundwater accounting platform as kind of a primer for this June 25th launch. A little bit of history here. So this was initially built for Rosedale Rio Bravo Storage District, which is down in Kern County. In 2021, the platform joined with the California Water Data Consortium, and this really helped them just get funding from the Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Building software is really expensive, so this was a huge help in getting this platform off the ground and investing in the software. And then since then, we've engaged a number of pilot users, so different GSAs, particularly Merced Irrigation Urban GSA, which is a farmer, and also Merced Subbasin are both also using this platform, which is really helpful. So if you're farming in those agencies, you'll have one place to go to look at all of your information for all 3 GSAs. But yeah, we've been working really closely with these pilot users to inform how the platform continues to get developed. And just for some context, we started in 2018 down in Rosedale Rio Bravo, and the initial functionality was really informed by growers in these public workshops from growers trying to understand what is the functionality that you need in order to be successful, and then on the GSA side, what are the functions and features that the GSA needs in order to be able to successfully manage and track water across the GSA. So it's been a really heavily involved process, engaging growers and different folks across the state to better understand, how we can make this tool helpful. The platform does a lot of stuff. Right now for East Turlock Basin, I think we're really focused right now on making sure that we are tracking water budgets and that we're giving you guys as growers tools to analyze and understand the data that the GSA is using. I just want to touch on a couple of the key features that are going to be important for June and going forward. So the first is water accounts. Everybody's going to have access to their water account, which is the parcels that you own and operate within the GSA. We're going to have some guidance on how this gets set up at the June meeting. There's a couple of different ways that you could set up your water accounts to give yourself some flexibility in how you want to manage your water in the GSA. And the other part of sort of big key feature here is access to this landowner water budget. So we heard before about the questions about precipitation. Our recommendation is the way we calculate consumed groundwater is to say that consumed groundwater is the total ET minus the effective precipitation and then minus your ET from surface water deliveries. So we're really making sure that we're being transparent and clear in the system so that you can see specifically what your total was and then how much of that is actually coming from groundwater based on precip and surface water deliveries. So that's going to be in your water budget, and this is going to get broken down per parcel, and then it will get rolled up to the account level. So you can drill down if you need to say, okay, do I have like a mischievous or a naughty parcel that's like going crazy, or you know, or things looking pretty normal. Yeah, so that's where we're at with the groundwater accounting platform right now. I just wanted to plug this if it's not already in your calendars, that this is on June 25th. We picked a different location, so I just want to be really clear that this is at the Turlock Community Library. We've had more than one scare in Alico where the internet went out. And this is going to be a group exercise where you can bring your laptop. You'll get a card in the mail that has your water account pins on it, so you can actually bring those cards to the workshop with your laptop, and we'll get you all set up on the platform at that time. But we just need to be 1000% positive that the internet works for us to do that successfully. So,
Diana, are we gonna have computers available for people to log in as well? I mean,
Yeah,
I'll bring a couple with that.
yeah, so the community library does have a couple of laptops that we can rent while we're there, and we're looking into that, but ideally folks can use their own laptops, that way you can save your password and all that good stuff, but we'll have some options available in that case.
And is that compatible like on like smart devices, like the phone? Or, you know, like sometimes those websites are not as user friendly on phones, and so if you don't have a laptop available, are you able to log onto your phone and still have like the same functionality?
Phones are a little trickier, so it's not built for mobile, but it'll work on a tablet. So
Okay.
like an iPad or a tablet or a laptop or like a larger screen, that's great, yeah. And it does work on your phone, it's just, I don't know if you've ever
It's
had
not-
to do like that.
yeah,
Zoom.
yeah.
So I will say that we specifically selected this platform because it was, of the ones that we considered, it was the most user-friendly on a phone, so I'm not saying it'll work perfectly, but it was more user-friendly than others. So, go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, I was just, is it more Apple based or is it, you know, Android, Microsoft?
It'll do it all.
It does it all.
Yeah, we, you know, different people have different types of devices and we test across all those different types of devices when we're watching our stuff. And same with like internet browsers. Any other questions on sort of the rules and regs process or groundwater accounting platform launch?
How do you opt out for this whole deal?
You
That's what I want to know.
can't, unfortunately.
Nobody asked for this.
Nobody asked for it. I know, this is, I don't know, I feel like I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and it's like never easy. And you can't opt out, and I think we kind of make the best of it.
So
You have a difficult.
what I can tell you is I can explain the process, okay? So, currently, we're developing the platform, we're developing the ET. There's another, it's called the Proposition 218 fee process that we're going to be starting, for the volume-based fee. That's a public process. It's a protest vote process. So you can get a ballot, you can register a protest vote. So that's the process that I can make available, other than, you know, inviting you to come and get involved in meetings and express your opinions.
Hard to go to too many meetings and make a
I
living.
got you, yeah.
How did this deal work for the tax, the acreage tax? Now, I just got a deal in the mail saying that passed.
That did pass, so that's our operational budget. The extraction fee would pay for our projects and our management actions. So our projects to bring more water to more parcels, surface water to more parcels, and our incentive payments to change land uses to less irrigated, that would be funded by the extraction fee that we're talking about. So going back, in order to fund our GSA, you know, the monitoring, the planning, the compliance reporting, and so forth, There's information about it on the Turlock groundwater website. There's a little thing on the Prop 218 assessment. So that's a land-based assessment where you're assessed per irrigated acre or per non-irrigated acre based on the county codes. And that passed on April 2nd. We're doing two assessments. One is a supplemental assessment for this current quarter for April through June. And that's you should, if you're within EWD, that'll be paid for by EWD under its own revenue system. If you're outside EWD, you'd be getting an invoice from the GSA later this month. And included with that invoice is a policy, an application, and an FAQ that describes how to recategorize your parcel from irrigated to non-irrigated if you're not irrigating your parcel or if you're irrigating with surface water home.
So then it would be less of a fee per acre, that's, that's the difference.
Yeah, for
There's still
non-irrigated.
fee, but not irrigated.
For non-irrigated land, this is determined from county assessors codes. It's $1.54 an acre. For irrigated land, I think it's $17.75 an acre. And that's based on the county's use codes. But if the county got it wrong, then there's a form you can fill out, would reclassify your parcel as non-irrigated. Or let's say that you're irrigated, you hit the use codes for irrigated, but you're using only riparian water and you don't need or want to use a groundwater well, then you can also be reclassified as non-irrigated.
What about people that never got that ballot in the mail? Which seems to be pretty prominent.
It got mailed out to 900.
Was it certified mail or how's that work? Huh? Oh, I didn't sign for mine.
Yeah, I can't speak to this. So, I mean, if you didn't get it, let me get your name and number and we'll investigate.
And the mailing address that you received, the information about it would be the same mailing address that the ballot was mailed to, so.
No, I got mine. I got mine, but there are people that didn't get theirs, is my understanding.
Then they should, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of informational stuff out there on the website as well as, at meetings that was announcing it and
Very
stuff.
difficult to get information on the website.
On the Turlock subbasin or,
Just as far as this whole, anything that's gonna cost you money. Anything that's gonna cost you money is very, very difficult to get information about. I mean, I'm on the email list and everything else, and I mean, come on. What it looks like to me is it was a set deal before, you guys decided how it was gonna be, and that's how it was, and you went through the required process. It wasn't a one property, one vote deal like it should be, and it is fair in the United States of America.
well,
You base it off of dollars.
every
That's not fair.
can receive the ballot. And then the type of 218 that it was
How many
structured.
dollars they can generate, correct?
No, it's
That's
based
a
off.
dollar is a vote, right?
No, it was a rate structure to pay for the operations of the GSA.
I understand.
And if you were non-irrigated, your benefit of those operations was less than an irrigated
So
parcel.
you had less votes.
Correct.
I mean, that's not fair. It's not fair at all. I don't know, who made that decision? How
And
did
your
it come
fees would
about?
be,
And how can we see the ballot process?
well, the
That's
ballot
all I
process
want to know about all this.
was right here, but we can, I mean, there's more detail. We have all the breakdown of the ballots received, the breakdown of the
There's only
ballots
like
sent.
300 received, right?
I don't have them to.
There's
I sent
between
the mail.
300 and 400 received. I don't have the stats right in front of me. We sent out over 900.
Mhm.
And when it's, there was a majority that voted for, just in terms of individual voters. But the result is weighted under the law that this assessment is done under, based on the amount of a bill that a parcel would owe. So let's say, for example, that you have a 10-acre parcel that's assessed at $154 an acre, and somebody owns 1,000 acres that's assessed $17.75.
You're less of a
That-
citizen than that man is. That's how
Well,
it is. That's how it's set
That
up.
was a decision made in
By
that
who?
particular law
By
that
who?
it that's how these kinds of assessments were gonna be weighted, that the folks with the most skin in the game would get. the
That's
most
called a
say.
fixed outcome, what that is.
What is that?
It's a
Mike,
fixed-
if I could maybe chime in here on this, my name's Caitlin Bercy. I'm legal counsel for the GSA, and as noted in the engineer's report, the ballots are weighted according to whatever the obligation will be on the landowner, and that's in compliance with Proposition 218, which is Article 13D, Section 4 of the California Constitution. So we did comply with that requirement. And, if there are further questions about the language of the requirements, we can certainly, we'd be happy to discuss that separately one-on-one.
Fixed outcome.
That's right. She's wrong, by the way.
If there are any questions about rules, Greg, and groundwater accounting, yeah.
Generally speaking, how much are we gonna be able to pump without a fee? And then how much, is it gonna, each tier gonna be?
So the tiers have not been set yet. That's a discussion that's gonna take place between now and probably late summer. There will be a base fee for all pumping, and then there will be let me back up. We envision that there will be a base fee for all pumping, and then higher tiers if you're pumping above a certain base level.
Do you have a general idea what that might look like?
In terms of the amounts,
The amount that you can pump without a fee or within that base fee? And then what the different tiers are gonna look like, just give an idea how much I can expect to pump? Is it gonna be a third?
Probably, well, no, it's our back up. The current pumping of about 250,000 acre feet, we're estimating needs to come down by roughly 100,000 acre feet.
Right.
There may be additional reductions above that are needed depending on other considerations around I'm gonna get myself stuck here. There's conversations going on with Turlock Irrigation District regarding how much of the groundwater beneath the GSA leaked from their facilities. Okay, and that needs to be accounted for. If there's a cost for that, that's also going to be used for funding projects in the basin. But all of that is currently being figured out. So we cannot give you a specific number right now. We're currently estimating what the projects cost and what our costs are gonna be for the water.
And Mike, I think he's asking how much groundwater would he be able to pump in the base allotment?
That'd be a start, yeah.
Not enough to farm.
I can tell you that our current analysis is that in the base allotment, it's gonna be somewhere over 2 feet. And it may be more than that. So
how many acres
I
will
just
be-
hesitate to come out there with specific numbers now because there's a conversation that needs to take place with, with our technical advisory committee and in public meetings where we lay all this out and walk through it. So we initially started to go down that path and we decided, well, wait a minute, we need all the information and we need to work through it systematically in our technical advisory committee meetings in order to be able to get to a final.
When will those rates come out?
So I think, well, our Prop 218 process is scheduled to be closed and put out for vote toward the end of the year or early next year. So, prior to that time, in the fall, you should start seeing the proposals and the, draft reports that, put it out for the public to comment on before it's put out for a vote.
And then when will it kick in?
It would kick in starting with the 2025 irrigation season, but it wouldn't be assessed until the end of the irrigation season.
And that's really, just to encapsulate what Savannah was saying earlier, that's why we're launching the platform on June 25th, is so that you have something to work with for the rest of this year to play with, to see what your water consumption looks like based on Land IQ's data. And if you're seeing discrepancies, we can talk about those now when it's not under the fee program. It's under just a pilot. We're playing with it. We're seeing if it's working right. So that when we get into 2025 and there are fees associated with it, you have more confidence in the information that's coming to you.
I want to go here and then we have a question.
I have a monitoring question. Flow meter data that's been shared, has that been compared to the Land IQ ET data, and how close are they?
Yes, so we have a report that's coming out on that. We had a pilot program. It wasn't Land IQ data, although we've got Land IQ data alongside that too at this point. And I'm not prepared to give you a complete report because I haven't looked at it yet. I can tell you that there were some cases where we were really close, and then in another case, we were really close for the whole year, but the spring was off because it was a wet year. And so what wound up happening is that the meter data was a lot less than the ET data in March, April, and May, and then it started to break even to where the ET data started to go below the meter data, and at the year's end, it was pretty close.
That's an important point. Sometimes when you get many times when you get big rainfall years, that ET will trail into more than 1 month and of that precipitation. So the time frame in which you're looking at things is important. In the June, July, and August, pretty good. You're not gonna get much rainfall, right? So it's pretty square up to applied water. There's even a trail of applied water too. I talked about someone irrigating on May 31st, and then they'd say our ET was greater in June than what they applied, which was true for that block of time. You shot it right there, but there was still some trailing. I call it spillover. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, one thing to note is we set up intentionally our recommendation for the reporting period to start in November and end in October, so that we're not cutting off all irrigation in October. So the way that this is gonna work is we're gonna kind of start the clock in November, and you'll go all the way through October, and then we'll take a total at the end of that reporting period and see what the balance is, and then we'll start it over again. But what the goal is to not be month to month because of these sorts of spillover effects. We're gonna be giving you updated monthly numbers, but the banking analogy is really helpful that there's these, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the GSA board here, and I think there's something, maybe Joel, that you could answer. So from a monthly standpoint, they may be off because of residual water.
Right.
But on a yearly basis, how accurate are you finding Land IQ to calibrated meters?
I showed it to you.
Yeah, I saw it.
Those two figures were pretty good.
Like
Pretty good.
High
Never perfect.
97%, was that? Was it 97%?
Well, that was the crop mapping. We are almost always below received water where you want to be. And we're probably about 90% of the total received water, 80 to 90% of the total received water. Depends on how much rain occurred and when that occurred. Those figures I showed you are down south in Kern County where they got 4 to 6 inches of rain. So the rain isn't that impactful. Here you get a lot more, so it's more impactful, and that spillover effects take place. So yeah, we don't want to be flying above the total received water, or else we're estimating your demand too high. We don't want to be at 50% of the total received water, we're estimating too low. That's the purpose of the stations, to calibrate to get us where we need to be. And we, our phones are, my number's up there. You call me if you have any, as you go along, you want to learn and have any questions, just call me.
How, on the average in our area, how close or what's the farthest distance of a weather unit to some of the ET measuring on almond blocks in this area?
We have, I think we have 5 stations in east, and then we have a number in west as well. And we don't really care where that dividing line is, because we're looking at the surface of the ground, and that's maybe a groundwater divide or something like a basin divide, but we're looking at it. So we use stations that are nearby, like crops and stuff. So it kind of and they use these and we use theirs. So
Yeah.
it kind of goes both ways. So there's about 8 or 10 or 10.
So when we have rainfall events and, Snelling gets another 2 inches, then Valico, do you look at then public weather stations and adjust those numbers?
We have rain gauges on our stations here, and we look at public weather stations that we trust.
Okay.
I wonder if there's another.
Question about the water accounts. Just so I just want to be clear. You guys have done a tremendous amount of work comparing pixel colors, it runs ground truthing, so you know you're pretty accurate. And that's what I'm going to get charged based on, right? An estimate of how much I use, consumed water, where you throw in rainfall, when you dump it out. It's really not based on actual use. So if I decided I just want to keep my pump running and start filling water trucks or something, I could do that? You wouldn't know, right?
As a matter of policy, what we use is ET. We agree that we're gonna use ET. We're gonna give, an allocation or an allowance based on parcel acres. We're gonna measure ET on fields, and we're going to subtract out the effective precipitation and any surface water deliveries that we are aware of. And we'll subtract those out, and then that'll be compared to a baseline to figure out what the different tiers are that you would be charged in.
So then just real quick, back to the salinity in the soil, if I choose, my trees are watered, so my soil's got a lot of salinity in it, if I choose water a little extra, it's gonna move that down. We're okay with that, because it pushes past the leaf zone, and ultimately then it ends up back to the groundwater.
I mean, I think those are individual decisions.
But I mean,
What we're
you're not
trying to,
gonna know that if you're.
yeah. I mean, what we're trying to drive as a GSA is kind of across the board averages. We know we need to come down. If we don't come down, we're gonna have issues potentially, you know, we might have issues like subsidence. The big thing that we're trying to avoid is we want to hit our targets so that we don't go into probationary status.
No, I understand all of that, I just wanna make sure I understand how I'm gonna get billed.
Right, it would be based on ET, so that's remotely sensed from the top. And in terms of what practices you implement that help the health of the subbasin, there, we are anticipating that under our MLRP program that we're gonna subsidize some of those practices. So for example, if you're gonna capture more rainwater, more runoff, and use it either for, either recharges or it is used to supplement your irrigation, we want to incentivize that kind of project, that kind of land use.
I do want to jump in. There's a question online about, is there a list of approved farm monitors that the district will accept? And we don't have that at this time. That would be part of the appeal process with meter data. If the Rules and Reg Ad hoc committee wants to recommend, and the TAC wants to recommend to the board that we want to have a list, then that's something that will come up in the policy.
When you do the evapotranspiration, you're a foothill farm, right? And then you go to calculate precipitation on an incline. How does that work? Like, there's gonna be less surface that retains water while it sits and, you know, vacates the property, leaves, goes down in the ditch, wherever it goes.
On you talking sloping ground?
Yes, correct.
We are a vertical assessment, up and down. If you have runoff, run on, we don't assess that. We pick up, and we've seen that a little bit along the eastern edge of Tulare County and the citrus groves. You get a little bit of run on. Got to be a pretty big rainstorm event, and they're talking about how they assess or account for run on and run off.
Okay.
So it is a thing, that's true. But if you capture it.
Yeah.
And make it go this way, vertical, maybe you can take advantage of that.
Well, the other thing is that, you know, for example, in the effective precipitation, we were talking about how granular do we want to get, right? I mean, there are models available that will help us to evaluate on a parcel by parcel basis, what's your soil water balance. But that's difficult for us to implement as an agency. So we want to start with kind of area-wide averages and then see where we go from there. Yes, sir.
We're running out of time, and I want to put in a plug if I may. Next, not this Thursday, but the following Thursday, we are putting on a conference, and we're going to discuss, let
You
me
know
start
what,
out.
actually, we can let you say what you need to say, but we need to move up this workshop first, because,
Question right here.
yeah, we want to make sure we get all the growers'
topic.
questions.
Have any GSPs been accepted using ET-based monitoring? And were there any comments when ours got kicked back using ET? Does the DWR want us to eventually go to flow meter monitoring?
So, for probationary basins, they require it, right? But they have accepted ET, and they are in fact using ET for their own purposes as well. What was your?
So
your
there's
other-
a couple of GSAs or GSPs that are using ET that have been approved. Merced's been approved and they're using ET. They're also using the groundwater accounting platform. North Fork Plains in the King Subbasin is using ET and groundwater accounting in this way. Their GSP has been approved by DWR. So there are a number of folks who are using this methodology and this approach that have GSPs that have been approved.
Okay.
And then
And was there any comments on our GSP that got kicked back?
Not because of ET. The related comment that got kicked back was they said, okay, so we developed an adaptive management program that we based on what we gleaned from earlier critically overdrafted basin GSPs that were accepted. And by the time that DWR got around to reviewing our GSP, they found that those adaptive management approaches had some issues, and they found that they needed to be more specific in their opinion. And so what they dinged us on was that we were not specific enough with respect to our decisions, our goals, and exactly how we were going to implement them with projects and management actions. And they've been working with us to get more specific and have a more specific decision framework as to how we implement demand reduction and how we implement projects. And so we're pulling that all together into a plan now. It's all stuff that we've been working on since we submitted our GSP. It just wasn't done when we submitted our GSP. So since then, we've been working on all of the stuff that they've asked for, and now it's just left to us to pull it together into a plan and append it to our resubmitted GSP.
And that's due in July?
July 17th.
Yes.
And I do want to add on to your question about moving towards meters. It's the state board that is really pushing that. Department of Water Resources has not given that same direction. So as Mike said, those that have entered into probationary status, they're before the state board. They are getting that direction, not where we are. We're still currently with Department of Water Resources.
The state board did include language at the 11th hour for ET as an alternative to meters.
Sarah, this may or may not be the right time to ask this question, but for a lot of us, including myself, we have a control board and we have a DWR, two separate.
Correct. So the difference is under the Sigma law, we have to produce this groundwater sustainability plan, which we did in 2022, and we submit that to Department of Water Resources. And the Department of Water Resources reviews it and says, we think you're headed in the right path. You can reach sustainability based on what you've told us. Or we have some concerns in areas that it's not clear that you're able to reach sustainability in the 20 years. So we want you to fix those. That's where we are at this moment in time. Other basins, another approach that some basins got, they got some recommendations like we have right now. They made some changes and DWR said, okay, it looks good. We can keep proceeding forward. You have an approved process. Others did not get that, and Department of Water Resources said, now you still don't have a plan we're comfortable with. we're gonna send you over to the regulatory agency, which is State Water Resources Control Board. And State Water Resources Control Board has 6 subbasins that they are currently evaluating and reviewing. And they put the first one in the status of probation just a couple of weeks ago. And so they are going through each one of those 6 and reviewing and giving direction and then having a hearing on those and determining if they'll be in probation or if they have made the necessary changes to move back to Department of Water Resources, where you're just implementing, you're not being regulated by the regulatory agency. So hopefully that.
And that's, we want to stay in the DWR side, not really. So that's the
Absolutely.
whole point of us
Yeah.
moving forward
Mhm.
with our plans. and
Exactly.
Implementing all this stuff is to stay out of that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I work in basins that are before State Water Resources Control Board right now. It is not a fun place to be, and the answers are not clear. We may say you have to do this, in another 6 weeks, we might add more to it, is kind of the feedback we get. Where Department of Water Resources, I can say, at this moment in time, from the meetings we've been having with them, they've been very communicative and telling us what would be helpful to put in our plan and things that we can do and are good for the basin. So I think we're headed in the right direction, and I think we're gonna have a good outcome in July. I'm very hopeful, but you're exactly right. That is our whole goal, is to stay with Department of Water Resources and implement our plan.
In the right property.
Yes.
So,
But the water does belong to the state. So
I guess
it's not a mineral right.
the property does too, I guess, because it's really property rights, what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
How many times do you get to resubmit it before you're?
You just bite at the apples you get. Really, from what they've done with other basins, it's this one that we have to submit in July. So when we submit in July, it's an approval or send you over.
And how long is that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Question regarding cover crops in your orchards and winter forage crop, how that use very little groundwater pumping, it's primarily, rainwater driven. Where do those go? Are we gonna be looking, is that gonna incentivize a scorched earth policy in our orchards just to keep it from being green?
So we're actually gonna be taking a closer look at cover cropping. As you know, it's a complicated topic in terms of when does it add to your ET versus when does it really improve your soil moisture retention and decrease the runoff. So there's ways to do it that we think are potentially low-hanging fruit. And we're gonna explore that further as part of our MLRP program to make that information available to folks that are interested in going in that direction. Other things that we're exploring as part of our MLRP program would be, okay, let's say, for example, that information regarding seed mixes or drill seeders and so forth, is it possible for our grant money to pay for some of that stuff so that the costs can be shared and covered? So I mean, cover cropping is just one piece of it. It's probably a small piece of our MLRP, but it is something that we're looking at and to see if it can be done in a way that helps with multiple benefits, with our main goal being groundwater use reduction.
I think it's also fair to say the intent is not to encourage scorched earth, right? We want happy, healthy ecosystems and farms. And scorched earth is not that, so.
But having one of the few that have a dairy here also, you've got winter crops that are grown without kicking the pump on, and there's no water, coming. You're collecting water through lagoons and tail ponds, you can get charged for rain.
Yeah, dairies do have, separate water supplies, and so that's something that we can figure out in the rules and regs. Down in Tulare County, they have a lot of dairies, and they developed a lot of different processes and methods for specifically doing this kind of accounting on the dairies to account for the fact that you're recycling a lot of water. So we have less dairies, and so it's a little bit further down on our rules and regs topics, but it is there, and it's something that we're aware of that we need to account for dairies and food water separately.
Any other questions?
Just that one.
Yes.
Kind of jumping back a little bit, do we have a time frame for the incentive programs to like the one you mentioned where you pull out an orchard and maybe wait a year or two before you replant? Those kinds of programs?
Yes. So those are being developed under our MLRP plan, which is expected to be adopted in the spring of 2025 and then approved by Department of Conservation in the summer of 2025. And that'll include the incentives. But before that happens, we're working toward getting a better idea of what we want it to look like. So between now and the end of the year is really when we'll be developing those incentive structures.
But essentially, we've got a couple of years before they're implemented. probably.
Yeah, I mean, we would be starting to implement as early as middle of 2025. So let's say, for example, that you had an orchard that you wanted to take out of production. That is one of the practices that's high on our list, is a 3-year hiatus and paying you per acre per year for keeping that that orchard area non-irrigated. I mean, you can grow, rye or winter wheat or something or whatever on it in the meantime, or recrop. Recropping is also something that we're looking at as an incentive.
And just to a little bit further on timing on that, what we're doing right now is creating the plan that we have to submit to Department of Conservation to then get the funding to do the programs. So that plan is being written over this year, and if you know you're coming into a cycle that you might be interested in 2025 of jumping into that 3-year rotation, it would be good to have that kind of information. So when the funding comes, we kind of have that lined up and ready to go. That's the intention of this planning process, is to have some projects that will be ready to go out the door the minute we get approval.
I may be jumping ahead, but when we get to the Land IQ app, it kind of piggybacks on what Cal said. Are we going to be able to determine which water came off our lagoons, which water came out of the river, which water came out of the canal versus what we actually pump out of it?
Yeah, that's it. So we've defined different supply types in the platform right now. We have not addressed the dairy issue yet. So that'll be coming. But what you'll be able to see in the platform is your total ET, and then you'll also be able to subtract off your effective precipitation. So if you don't have surface water, we can tell you in June what your consumed groundwater is going to be per parcel and at the field level. If you get surface water, that is going to be incorporated in the coming months as we get surface water data from the different providers, right? But we also had it come up like during the flooding, right? Or if you were pulling water off the creeks and you have them in ponds, there's going to be a way for you to report to the GSA that you use that water. And as long as you can give us a number and back it up with some data, then that's something that we're going to consider. So, and that'll be in there so you can specifically see where those things get applied and how much.
Mike, or I don't know, Mike well, anyway, Sue, but can you just, since we have a captive audience here, explain to people that if they want to capture rainwater on their property and recharge it, that they can get a value benefit to their farm later. So people can kind of start thinking about what can I do to help myself.
So we've done some preliminary studies to help quantify, how much runoff could potentially be covered, and it's pretty captured, and it's pretty encouraging. But we think we can get to after evaporation losses and recharge, that we can get to somewhere around 10,000 acre feet per year fairly simply. And so one of the things that we're wanting to do is develop almost like a BMP manual approach that tells you that, okay, if you want to develop a retention basin on your property, here are some basic designs that you could use, and here are some streamlined permitting approaches that you could implement. And then the GSA would pay an incentive for that kind of development. So basically, we would have the RCDs would go out and work with you to develop the project. That project would be put into an application and a proposal that goes back to our MLRP steering committee and gets compared in that particular cycle to other projects. And then the most favorable projects, the highest scoring projects get funded. And frankly, I mean, we have a pretty ambitious goal in terms of the amount of that kind of work that we want to do. So I would anticipate that we're going to be trying to disperse, a lot of incentive funds to rewild orchard swales where your trees are not good, build retention basins, reconnect floodplains of small streams, and then, things like the rotational fallowing of orchards, recropping, cover cropping, irrigation efficiency tools that, if there's a tool available and you're minded to use it, we want to incentivize getting that information out there and getting it applied.
Okay. No other questions on the Sigma process or where we are for today with the ET and the platform. I'm going to close out the workshop and thank you all very much for coming and thank you for all your questions. I think they're very helpful for us as staff as well to make sure that we're remembering all the various components of the GSA and the things that we need to be thinking about when we're building these rules and regulations. So these meetings are just as important for us as they are, I hope, for you. And we're going to try to continue to build tools and mechanisms that help you through this process. We're here to do that as opposed to make this a hindrance. So we're trying to make it as positive as possible. I know it's painful for all of us, but we definitely want to work with you as the growers in the area and make sure we're providing you the tools that will be helpful. So thank you for your time. And we will have it June 25th at the Turlock Community Library. And so you'll get flyers on that as well. But thank you all for your interest today.
Okay. And then Mr. Avila had a.
Yeah, if you would like to address people now.
Yeah, first I'm going to commend what's going on here because it's tremendous and it's a requirement. And I'm really impressed with what Joe's company is doing. It's a tremendous amount of information. And they basically discuss what the state is trying to tell us what to do. I'm having a seminar, not this Thursday, but the 24th of this month, March, in Oakdale at the House of Beef. And we're going to have, the seminar is going to present, and we can answer questions like this gentleman had in reference to the ballot, which is not really a ballot, it's a contract. And that gentleman over there on his water rights. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about real solutions to this issue. Not saying that these people are going to go away because they have tremendous input. But we just want you to know your water rights and your rights and the limitations of the state of California. So I don't know, maybe Sarah, could you send this out?
I can't send that out for you.
Okay.
It has to be about the GSA.
Right. Yeah. So you can see the suppression here, but that's my.
Well, what's the date?
Do you have that?
Thank you, everybody online. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.